This is Tony Roberts, and you're listening to WBAI in New York, the voice of truth since 1960.
Well, Maliki, that just takes us right in to our guests that are coming up today, because we're going to have on Dr. Patrick Treacy, who just got in from Baghdad. He's back in Dublin, and he has a book out called The Needle and the Damage Done. He's an amazing person. He's traveled the world. He's one of the most famous doctors in the world, a county Fermanagh man, and he will be coming on later. And then after him, Mick Malampy of the First Irish Origin Theatre will be coming on about all the new things that are coming up that he's organizing with the theater organization. But what I'm going to do, Maliki, because you said of the term Patty, Dr. Patrick Treacy, who I got to meet in Midtown, there was an exhibition of 50 Patties, and it was to talk about the 50 different Patricks and to expel the myth of calling everyone a Patty. And he was one of them, and it was his picture was up in Grand Central Station outside in Pershing Square and down at a gallery. But last Sunday, we had a great fundraiser with Marine veteran Katie Bishop, who has a GI coffee shop on 9th Street in the Gowanus area of Brooklyn. And I did part of my play off the meter there, but we had two people that opened for me. Was Annie Lancellato, and she talked about her father being in the Marines and fighting in Okinawa and the effect it had on him when he came back and what happened to the family. And also David Gilney, the Irish playwright from Dublin, did part of his play about being hit by lightning in South Boston. And that was David Gilney at Principal BK GI Coffee House on 9th Street in the Gowanus section of Brooklyn. They'll be bringing that play over a bolt out of the blue. And our guest now that, thank God, we have lined up, everything is working, is Dr. Patrick Treacy, and his book out is called The Needle and the Damage Done. I got to meet him at the Fitzpatrick Hotel a couple of weeks ago when he was in town for the art exhibition of the 50 Patties paintings. Well, it wasn't paintings, it was actually pictures that were in Pershing Square and Grand Central. But he just left Baghdad yesterday via Turkey into Dublin, and I'm looking at his Facebook book site, and Patrick, I want you to comment on this. Dr. Patrick Treacy worked as a staff health doctor at Air Bitar Hospital in Baghdad during the Saddam Hussein reign in 1990. He was arrested near Erbil by the Iraqi army while traveling through Kurdistan and jailed for 5 days while sourcing material for an article for the Fermanagh Herald about the gassing of the Kurds in Halabja. He revisited the hospital this week, where he was invited to speak at a dermatology conference in Baghdad. Now, Patrick, I just wanted to know, how come the impartial reporter didn't hire you to do this? It was the Fermanagh Herald.
Good day, John, from Dublin to New York, or good morning, I should say. It's afternoon here. Well, actually, to be fair, the impartial reporter did do a nice article on me in New York recently, and the Fermanagh Herald didn't. So,
well, there you go.
Things are changing.
Yes.
Things are changing.
So how surreal was it now to go back after you were in jail in Iraq and to be invited back and to speak at this conference? And what is Baghdad like today? Because I have the vision of you being in an SUV with a flak jacket on and being driven from the green zone to the hospital. What's Baghdad like today?
Oh, okay. Well, there's a couple of questions in there, and you're right. I think I had that vision myself. And so I was a little brave going back into the middle of, I suppose, Hell's Kitchen, as we used to know in New York. But it wasn't like that at all. It was really laid back. I was in the green zone. There was no sign of any sort of patrols. So there was no security. And things are coming back to normal, thank God. But if I could relate back to the period, which is now 33 years ago, when I did work in the hospital, this was a big hospital. It was a tertiary referral centre. It was run by the Irish government through Aer Lingus in a group called Park. And we had nurses and doctors from Ireland, doctors as well from England doing cardiac surgery. And we had some radiologists from Denmark. We had a wonderful community there of about 450 people. Originally, when Saddam Hussein gassed the Kurds, America led us to believe it was Iran, because Iran was the evil Satan then, as the roles reversed, but it was actually Iraq, who was a friend of the West at that stage. So the Sunday Times broke the story in March of that year, when I had actually just come back home on holidays, that it was Iraq that was involved. And we had patients coming into intensive care units that had aplastic anemia, a form of leukemia that was caused by saffron and by the mustard gases. So I used to have to get up in the middle of the night to go down to these patients to do blood cultures to see what bacteria was in the bloodstream, because a lot of them were dying from septicemia. And I decided to go up the 700 miles, and we weren't allowed into it at that stage. But I'd done a lot of writing about Babylon, about Nineveh, Karbala, and I wanted to go up into Al-Abalia to see what had happened there. Now, I was arriving up there some months later after it happened, if you could appreciate, John, so the evidence of what happened wasn't my reason for going there. I really just wanted, I suppose, to witness it, to be there and meet the people. I've been in some interesting things in the world. I was in the Soviet Union, living for a period when it turned over into Russia. So I like being on the sort of, maybe growing up in Northern Ireland, I don't know. I've written 6 books, so it was nice to sort of be there when things were happening. And the interesting thing was that when I went there, I had to dress as a Kurd and travelled overland with some of people that were probably Peshmerga. I got, I suppose, meeting the people, chatting with them, seeing where things had happened, even though most of the evidence had been cleared up at that stage. But when I came back, I was arrested by the Iraqi army because they were sort of closing in this. You could see them in the hills around. Got a year's jail sentence from a fast judge, Schnell Richter. And I'm not sure if they ever moved me out of the prison in the police station to the formalist place. But the interesting thing was, I mean, it was pretty rough. I mean, I could hear the people being tortured. I'm not sure if my taxi driver ever got out. And one morning, a colonel came down, put a gun beside me on the bed, roughed me up a little bit, nothing too heavy, and said, "You think we're all barbarians?" And I said, "No, I don't actually." And I didn't, to be fair. And he says, "I know James Joyce. I know Trinity College. Some of my cousins, have been to Ireland University." And with that, he sort of marched me up in front of his colleagues and threw me out the door. And I stood looking at him. And I said, "Actually, can I get my knapsack?" Which he did. He threw it out after me. And then I had to walk quite a distance. Wasn't really sure whether in this walk of shame I was going to get shot or not, because the whole thing was behind me and I'd witnessed things at nighttime that I don't want really to relate or to remember. But so I got a taxi and made my journey 700 miles from, it was probably closer to Al Suleimani than it was to Erbil, and back to the hospital, got my gear, left to Dublin. That was the 28th of July 1990. Arrived in Dublin 1st July, went through Copenhagen, it was the first flight out, and went to the Galway races, and he actually invaded Kuwait the very day, the July the 2nd, 1990, and believe it or not, all my friends were held in the hostages, as hostages, if you remember, in the hospital. So Jesse Jackson went there, Muhammad Ali, to try and sort of free the hostages. And little by little, they got out from that period up to about February, maybe in that year. So it was exciting, interesting for me to go back to the hospital. Believe it or not, on the hospital was built next door to the Republican Guard. And on the first night of the bombing, the shock and awe, Norman Schwarzkopf, if you remember, we're so accurate, we can drop a bomb down a chimney stack, if you remember that video. I mean, the American troops bombed the hospital, and I think 25 people were killed. And so the hospital was wrecked. And so they rebuilt it as a cardiac center. And it's interesting, sort of listening to the people in Iraq now, because they don't hold any malice. At least the ones I met who were educated just think this was our destiny. And these poor people, to be fair, if you consider that Tamerlane the Great wiped out with the Mongols in 1284, I think it was, killed 1 million people in the Tigris ran blue with the library ink, and then it ran red with the deaths of the people. So from that period, it wasn't ruled by anybody from Iraq, except for the period of Saddam Hussein. Because after that came the Iranians, they ran it for 800 years. After that came the British. After that, the Hashemites, and, then the Americans. So in a way, you've got to feel sorry for these people that were really the center of civilization. The birth of civilization happened there. Babylon was there, the Hanging Towers. Sumerian script started there. The art of writing started there. The first written text started there. And suddenly they're beguiled by all this that happened as a result of the Mongols. When the Mongols came, they knocked down all the irrigation in the city, knocked it back 26 miles.
Dr. Patrick, I just want to chime in because I want Maliki to ask. We're speaking with Dr. Patrick Treacy. He's got a book out, The Needle and the Damage Done. Maliki, do you want to jump in?
Oh, sure.
Hi,
hello. Hi, Doctor. And welcome to our gathering on Sunday. I was wondering about the government establishments in Iraq and what was it? Is there anybody there training medical folks?
Yeah. There's a couple of things. Ireland did train them in the period I went to the Royal College of Surgeons. We had a lot of Iraqi doctors, and what surprised me was there was very ineffective government until recently. Now, when I went to this dermatology conference, it was in a brand new building, and I mean the budget last year in Iraq was 120 billion, which is no small amount. There is some corruption. There is partially effective government. Yeah. Unfortunately, the troops of Mohammed al-Sadr still run the city a bit. So America, I suppose, gave Iran a golden card because most of the people were Shiite, not Sunni, that sort of Saddam Hussein was. And nearly 80% of the people in Iraq are Shiite, the same as Iran is. But certainly the oil is up in Kurdistan. So as a consequence almost of what happened during the years of the war, the transfer of power of the oil switched from the Arabs to the Kurds. And now I believe, parts of where I was up in Kurdistan now look like Dubai with brand new buildings and a whole new economy. And so that has happened also. And I've been invited back up.
Discrimination and against outsiders or how...
They're not, Maliki, they're not that type of people. The discrimination that they have was against themselves. Saddam, sort of took the Tikriti Sunnis and sort of, discriminated against the Shiites. No, but it was wonderful. On our gala night 2 nights ago in Baghdad, the Kurds and Arabs all came together and danced together and had, I put it on TikTok, put a lot of fireworks into the sky. And, these people are so hospitable to foreigners. They're the nicest people in the world. You couldn't believe it. And all the Arabic nations recognize that Iraq has always been like this. They sort of bring people into their homes, into their hearts. Even though they've nothing, they'll give you everything. I've seen the little shop guys on the street. If you walk by and you like something, and it's a different thing than buying. If you like it, they'll actually give it to you and not charge you. It's incredible,
It sounds like when under ancient Irish laws, there was a law about hospitality, that you couldn't refuse a stranger shelter or help or food or anything. And that was...
the brand law.
And then the Brits came and they knocked everything Irish out of the Irish. And so many, as you know, became the thing they hate the most, which is, I forget who said that. And so that sounds like Iraq.
The most amazing thing also is when I was in Iraq originally, Karbala, the shrines were closed down because they were Shiite. But now people go from Basra and walk all the way. But the reason I mention it is all along the route, people are there with free food, with free accommodation, if they want to sort of sleep in people's houses. the massage their feet. It really is worth looking at on YouTube. Some of these people walk 200-300 miles and the whole lines. You talked about the coronation earlier. These people are there almost coronation style, giving everything to everybody for free. It is just the antithesis, as you said, of the British royal family that are now worth 160 billion, but still get the taxpayer to pay for the event when they can well afford it themselves.
More minutes with Dr. Patrick Treacy. He has a book out called The Needle and the Damage Done. His life is unbelievable. It has to be a Netflix special because a movie wouldn't do it justice. There's not enough time. But you really became famous worldwide, and I'm looking at the front page of the Irish Sun. Irish doc fixes Jacko's face. And you were the doctor for Michael Jackson. How did that come about?
Well, I suppose after the Santa Maria trial, as you know, Michael went to Bahrain. There was a suggestion that maybe he should change from being a Jehovah's Witness to Islam, which he did not want to do. And as a consequence of that and some other things, I'll not go into it because I knew Michael quite well, he decided to come to Ireland. When he came to Ireland, he had some conditions that we can talk openly about now that Arnie Klein was treating, and I knew Arnie, he was before he died, and Michael had vitiligo. That's the first thing. He didn't want to change his face white. We actually changed it for him. He didn't do it himself. So we had to maintain, he was black and white. Particularly African patients, when they develop vitiligo, it's particularly striking because they're black with totally white areas and they look like a piebald pony. So we took Michael from the wrists down and from the ankles down and his face, and we continued the work that Arnie Klein had done using some chemicals to change Michael's face. Michael's problem was that he didn't tell people that he had vitiligo. People would have accepted it until he did mention it one day with Oprah to sort of just let people assume that he was magically turning white. The second thing is he had lupus, which the sun kicked off. And so that's why he wore the masks and the umbrella. He could have easily told people this also, but he didn't want his fans, I think, to think that he was in bad health. And the third thing is when we depigmented his skin, it left him susceptible, of course, to skin cancers. And I don't want to go down that route either because it's not the sort of thing I want to discuss regarding some of my patients. So Michael had built his own problems from the point of view that particularly the British press were horrible to him. When Michael had his head burned, remember the Pepsi Cola ad, and the Brosnan Pediatric Center in Los Angeles got $1.5 million from him, he brought into them a thing that we use in medicine, which is baric oxygen chamber, particularly if you're doing skin grafts on patients that may not take, particularly burns patients, and they got him to get into it in the hospital and then said he had it at home trying to sort of, keep himself young and have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which is total nonsense. I mean, he donated this to the hospital. It was horrible the way they treated him, and certainly they would have loved to have seen Michael go under or to jail in the Santa Maria trial because they'd already paid people in there to give stories on him. But I mean, a very cruel press, and even they approached me and were willing to give me 5-figure, and I could have done it. It was around the time of the Irish recession. I mean, I could have done with the money. And they were willing, to give me 5-figure sums to talk about Michael behind his back, which I wouldn't do. I wouldn't talk about any patient, but I just thought it was terrible what they did to him,
Was the, so he was trying to change, what would you call it, progressive obsession with the, He
had an autoimmune disease where his sort of body attacked the melanocytes in his skin and destroyed them. So, I mean, it's a condition that white people get it as well. I treat people all the time in dermatology with it, but it's particularly stunning with a black person because their face turns white in places and it's just black and white.
Right. So, and is it, what we're saying, is it a condition or a disease? What would you say it is?
It's both, really. I mean, I suppose it's a disease that causes the condition.
Yes.
And even Michael's abdomen was black and white. The first time I met him, and he was in the thing, he took down a book called De Vries, which is a famous book in dermatology. And he opened a chapter, with vitiligo with an African child. And he says to me, Patrick, you don't know the pain this child is going under. And I just tapped him on the head because I had to go out to do something. And I tapped him and says, Michael, vitiligo, there is no pain associated with it. But I could see in his eyes that he meant something deeper. And he meant, of course, the mental pain associated with it, And when I came back then, he pulled up the leg of his trouser and says, I have this condition. I was a bit shocked to an extent, but then he actually took off his wig and showed me the top of his head, which was all scarred after the thing. And he says, let's start here when we're doing some of the treatments. So, he was very open and honest with me, but he knew that probably he could trust us also.
Are we Irish more susceptible? Are our skins more delicate than any other?
To skin cancers?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. Well, the problem is this. We're not really more susceptible, but we happen to follow the British in where they planted their colonies in a way that, I suppose, the Swedish don't or the Norwegians don't. So the British give us some wonderful things, including their language and including some of the finest colonies in the world, which are in Australia, Phoenix, Arizona, Canada, and all the rest. So as a consequence, if you transmigrate Irish or Scottish people to Queensland in Australia, that's where the highest rates of malignant melanoma in the world are. I worked for 2 or 3 years in skin cancer centres there. And yes, there's no doubt about it that the native people who would live in Phoenix, Arizona, would not necessarily be Irish or Scots or Celts, and they would have more melanin in the skin and wouldn't be as susceptible. Black people don't tend to get melanomas. We do, but they get it under their nails. Bob Marley, you remember, died of a melanoma subungual under his nail, but his father was white also. So as a consequence, it's unusual. It's more usual for obviously Irish and Scottish that have no protection against the sun. If you transmigrate them into an area with intense sun, they obviously have no protection. They're going to burn, and sunscreen isn't going to do it for you. Really, you need to just stay out of the sun or wear hats.
What can we do? What's the best thing to do? I'm light-skinned, and I don't know. I have some. I don't know whether I'm susceptible, but maybe I am. I don't know. I haven't had any condition that requires medical treatment.
Well, anyway. Malachi, God in His goodness gave us triggers. If we're short of water, we get thirsty. If we are too long in the sun, we burn. And the problem is that when we put on some of that sunscreen, we're blocking the receptors that tell us we're in trouble and in pain. And people stay out in it too long then as a consequence. So skin cancer centres are going up through the roof. I wrote my first paper in the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota on malignant melanomas back in the 80s as a student, and predicted that rates would continue to rise, which they have. They haven't dropped yet. And in terms of sunscreen, certainly we advocated for people who have had previous skin cancers that should wear up to about 50. I'm not sure if I advocate that everybody in Dublin that gets no sun at all should be wearing sunscreen all day long, unless, of course, they're taking vitamin D supplements, Malachi, because if you're blocking out the sun and you are not taking vitamin D supplements, you're going to leave yourself more at risk of getting a heart attack and other cancers. That's well
Malachi, we're going to have to jump in here. Dr. Patrick Treacy, he has a book out, The Needle in the Dark. What we're going to have to do is have you back again and take phone calls and maybe have the doctor on the air and talk to our audience about what you specialize in and what you've done in your life.
Yeah.
So Patrick, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, John. And Malachi, great hearing you in such good form. Sorry I missed you in New York, but it was a quick in-out as well.
Yes,
yeah. So what we're going to do now is play a clip from Annie Lancelotti, the Lion of the Bronx, well known down in the Lower East Side, a street artist, and performs plays all over Ireland, actually, and here in New York. She did this at a fundraiser for Veterans for Peace at the Principal's BK GI Coffee Shop on 9th Street. And when we come out of this, we're going to have Mick Malampy on, and he's going to be talking about the first Irish Origin Theater and some of the things they have coming up this week.